Welcome to the Sports Card Lesson Podcast. I'm your host, Big Ken. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on a streaming service, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, and you'll be notified whenever I drop any new content. Welcome, and thanks for being here. Welcome, everyone. Happy Thursday. Got a great episode for you today, as promised. Collaboration with Sports Card Therapist. It was a great episode, and I hope you enjoy it. Without further ado, here we go.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sports Card Therapist and Sports Card Lessons podcast. We are doing another joint episode, and my name is Rob, your Sports Card Therapist. And Ken, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Rob, or should I say Rob?
You know what's great is you are the only one that does that, and you'd figure that there'd be more people that do, but yeah, you're the only one that's done it and has done it consistently.
Yeah, well, what are close friends for, right?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So yeah, we're headed toward the end of the week, and we have big plans for this weekend that we'll definitely touch on. We'll definitely talk about. But as far as everything else, man, how's everything going with you? How's everything like outside of the hobby going for with you?
Yeah, everything's going great. I just moved. We're all settled into the new house now, and my little business is good. I played a little golf today. We had 70-degree weather today, so it's good to be me right now. How
Yeah,
about you,
man.
man? I
Yeah,
know, I
no,
know, I know you are a busy bro. Like busy, it doesn't even describe what your days look like.
yeah, without a doubt, man. Yeah, I'm gonna be on John Newman's podcast tomorrow, at the time of this airing, Sports Card Nation, and he said I'm the busiest guy in the hobby, and I'm like, I think there's probably some busier guys like at like a higher level, like hobby wise, but yeah, I mean, I don't think I have any more on my plate than the average person, than the average 40-year-old man in the hobby does. You know what I mean? Like married, kids, job, hobby, content, and I think what makes my life so crazy and good crazy is that my hobby does take up a lot of real estate in my life. You know what I mean? And I try not to let it take away any time from my family, but it definitely I've had to cut out other areas of my life to make room for the hobby because there's only, we only have 100%, and the hobby requires a big chunk of that, I think, especially when you're really in it the way that we are, and the way that I think if you're listening to this podcast, the way that the listeners are too.
Yeah. Well, you have a young family. So right there, I mean, and I know I was there. It was years ago, but I was there and I know. I mean, when you have small kids, it's, 100% focused on them all the time. So finding time, and that's why, and I've talked about this, finding time to be in the hobby. For most people, when they started having kids and stuff, they just kind of stepped out of the hobby because it just became too much for them. And then when their kids got a little older, they started bringing their kids and getting back into the hobby. So you're one of those people who are doing it with young kids at home. So yeah, definitely shout out to you, because I don't know how many people could actually, you know, juggle both.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, man. So I just kind of started up, as you know, a little side project with Dustin Sports Car Dad. We started up a little show called Dinged Corners, and we're 3 episodes in, and over the last week or so, we talked about about the hobby and how I think a big part of the reason why we collect is because it's something that we actually do have control over, whereas like 99% of our life we just don't have control over, right? We don't have control over how our kids behave. We don't have, and we obviously, we can instill discipline and we can do this and that and try our best, but at the end of the day, I have no control over what my wife's going to say, how she's going to act, what my boss is going to say, all those kind of things.
Yeah.
So with the hobby though, we generally have full control over what we do in the hobby and how we collect. I mean, we really curate our collection to the way that we like it. And if there's something a little bit off about our collection, then we can kind of, curate it some more. We can sell things, trade things away, and work toward bigger goals. So
Mm.
that's it's I think that's another huge part of the hobby that has such an appeal on top of everything else. On top of
Yeah.
everything else, part of it is like, hey, this is actually something that we can control for the most part. We can't control the market, but we can control what our collection looks like.
Yeah, and it's also a little bit of an escape too, right? It gives us something to escape to. It creates balance in our life. We're not stuck doing one thing all the time. It gives us something to look forward to, and then, when we're in the hobby and we're doing those things in the hobby, you're a different person, right? I mean, all the things you do in the hobby. Now you're a sports card therapist, right? But when you're at home with your family, you're dad and Rob and you're a husband and a son and all that other stuff. But when you jump into the hobby, you're doing something else. And a lot of times those people don't understand that. Like if your family is not involved in the hobby, they don't understand the things that you're doing, even though you tell them, unless they're following along and they're watching these podcasts and they're watching these lives and they get a better understanding of what you're doing. If not, they really don't, understand, how much you're doing, and especially you, right? Especially you, because you have really stretched yourself thin out there with so many other projects. A lot of there's big projects, small projects, but a lot of things you're doing. I mean, I could probably count 5 different projects you work on, right? That you're doing, you're creating content for doing. And each one has to be a little different. And each one you have to come up with something new every week or almost something new every week, right? So it's a lot of work.
Yeah, and it is. And you know what? You know what's crazy is I don't even look at I don't even look at it like that for myself, but when I look at you, sometimes I wonder, I'm like, how does he come up with so many topics for his show? How does Ken come up with so many topics? And I know I'm at double the amount of episodes you've put out, but at the same time, almost 50% of those episodes have been with guests. So it's
Yeah.
like, and you very rarely have had guests. I mean, if you take me out of the equation, maybe you've had 10 guests on ever. So it's weird how we can see things in others that we really can't see in ourselves. You know what I mean? So whether if that's personal habits, whether if that's collecting, and I think, I think you can sometimes start to see that a little bit when you start trying to make deals and transactions with people in the hobby, right? Like you could be friends with someone, but the moment you start maybe looking to make a deal with them, that's almost like you start to see them in a totally different light.
Absolutely. And you don't know how many times that I wanted to do an episode just on that. And I just felt like I might hurt feelings,
You don't
right?
want to
Just
like ruin you don't want to ruin a couple friendships, right?
yeah, yeah, so and it's almost easier, you know, like if you've got a good friendship in the hobby, just don't do a deal with them, right? And if you do a deal with them, just be like, look, let me just give you this, and then someday if you have something that I want, you could just give it, like something. I don't know. It's just it's interesting. People change when you start to want to do a deal and there's cash on the table and we're talking comps and all this other stuff. People become a little different. Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt, man. And so we're live on YouTube right now, and some comments coming in. Mike Petty says Rob is the hardest working man in show business. Mike, I appreciate you, man. You're one of the hardest listeners in show business for sure, man. And it takes a dedicated mind, I think, to consume content as well. You know what I mean? There might be a little bit more that goes into it on the back end, like when you're creating the content and you're doing shows and stuff, but I mean, the listeners, the audience is putting in almost as much time consuming the content as we are with making it. So shout out to all the listeners and watchers for sure. And I'm kind of curious to what listeners would say about the next thing I'm going to say. So Ken, you and I have been like, tight as glue for 2 years in the hobby now, right? For 2 years, and we have never made a deal. We've never even started negotiations for a deal.
No, never.
We've never started negotiations for a deal. And I'm
No.
curious as to, like, maybe why that is. Like, I think I know why that is, but I'm not 100% sure, because I do know, and we were talking a little bit about this beforehand, that we really started out in the same lanes. Like, it felt like we were in the same lanes. Like, I definitely had my toe in another lane. You definitely had your toe maybe in another lane, but our planter's foot, the foot that we put all our weight on when we swing, that foot was in the same lane. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You were in the hobby, right? And you were kind of my mentor, or I not kind of, you were my mentor. I kind of jumped in, and we talked a lot. And when I was looking for information, I was going to you, and I was collecting a lot of the same stuff you were. Now, I really wasn't into basketball and baseball, and you were, so probably a lot of football. And then I started, getting involved in other sports, a little wrestling, a little tennis, some boxing, just different things like that, kind of trying to find, what made me happy, what gave me that feeling of joy in the hobby. And really, after what, a year, little over a year, right? We kind of, our collecting kind of took two separate paths. You started, going with all the vintage stuff, and I was still, even at that time, I was still prospecting, and I still do, somewhat prospecting today, but I'm starting to buy more, more and more, of goats. But when we were talking about doing this and talking about, this, I was thinking to myself, before the hobby, I spent time at the casinos. I used to like to go to the casino all the time. And I think that kind of that gambling mentality, I brought into the hobby where you could care less about, a casino or gambling or things like that. You're really just about a sure thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, very well said, man. The most gambling I do is, we take part in the same
A
lottery
lotto
pool,
club.
in the same lotto pool. That's, other than that, and the thing is too, without that club, I have never bought tickets for myself before. Never in my life can I ever remember buying lottery tickets, unless it was for some sort of, okay, we're gonna pitch in. Unless I was pitching in with someone else, I don't ever remember buying tickets. And yeah, the casinos, it just doesn't do it for me. I've gone to plenty of concerts, and had to walk right through the casino showroom floor and just walk past every single. There was even once or twice where I went to a concert and I stopped and I put $20 in a slot machine, and I realized that the only reason why I did that was to say that I did that. Like, I didn't even want to. I just wanted to be able to say, yeah, I went to the show, put $20 in a slot machine, like, but like I got no joy out of it at all. So, um, even thinking back to, and you talk about how, you're doing the prospecting thing, but you're moving more toward goats. I mean, thinking about some of the hockey players that you've been collecting, right? Like, none of them are really vintage. I know you picked up a Gretzky rookie recently, but none of them are really vintage, but they are GOAT material. They're Alexander Ovechkin, Connor McDavid. You're talking about Gretzky, obviously. I guess you can
Yep.
consider his rookie vintage because it's 79. You're dipping your toe into the Mike Tyson thing, and not really dipping your toe. You've jumped in with the Mike Tyson thing. You're the
Yep.
biggest Mike Tyson collector I know. So, it's like you're going for the goats too, but you're just doing it in a more modern kind of way. It seems like you're collecting the players and the athletes who you've really enjoyed watching, and
Mhm.
have direct connections with as far as memories.
Yeah, and you know what I realized in this hobby too is the cards that I really like are expensive, right? So, you know, I the ones that I want,
Yeah.
aren't cheap. So, and I talk about this on my podcast, right? So I'm out there. The money I'm making, at shows is I'm reinvesting into my PC, right? And I I think what happens is in my mindset is I say, okay, I want to put all these things on my table because I think they'll sell, right? And they're not necessarily, or in my case, it's not necessarily things that I want to collect. Some of them are, but um, and I start filling it up, and I get to a point like I'm at now, like I'm like, okay, I need to put the brakes on and start selling some of this stuff, right? Because I have so much stuff, and I'm like, okay, and there's a few things I have my eye on as far as cards, and I say, okay, I want these cards, so I got to start moving other things in order to fund, the larger PC purchases, and I think that's where we differ a lot too. I mean, because I'm talking to you and you said I only have so many things in my case now, and I'm saying I have too many things in my case. Like I spend all this time during the week and I'm looking, and on the weekends when we don't have shows, I'm at different shows and I'm shopping and I'm buying things. I'm like, this is good, that's good, and at some point I have to start moving some of these things.
Yeah, and I think really from the jump, and this is really what my podcast and my show's been about. As I want to look real quick and see what the 2-year anniversary is now that I'm thinking about it. Now that I'm thinking about it and actually saying it out loud. As you can see, we don't prepare for these. We don't
I
prepare for
I
these
just
at
passed
all.
by 1 year in March.
Okay, nice,
Yeah,
man, nice.
yeah,
Congrats on that. So
thanks.
May 19th. So May 19th will be the 2-year anniversary of episode 1 dropping. So so really from the jump, from episode 1, I've talked about and how my goal is always to consolidate and level up, consolidate and level up. Um, so it really is like this fine line between I do wanna find first of all, I don't wanna waste money on cards. If I am buying something, I wanna be near certain it's gonna be something that if everything went to 0, I would be happy to own, or B, I wanna make damn certain it is liquid. I don't wanna take a chance on, and I think that's why I don't like prospecting, because I I wanna make sure what I'm buying, if I had to move it or to fund a bigger piece, I wanna know for a fact I can move it. So, like, I just pulled these cards out of my case real quick. So, these are cards that when I bought them, I was happy I bought them. I was happy to own them, but now I know I could move them tonight if I wanted to. And these are, vintage cards. So, it's like a 52 Phil Rizzuto, a 73 Hank Aaron, a 69 Topps Clemente, a 66 Topps Roberto Clemente. So, all PSA graded. So, I know that with relative certainty that I could get for these cards probably within like 10% of what I paid for them. You know what I mean? So if I paid $100 for the card, I'm quite certain I could sell it for 90. Maybe I could sell it for 110, 120, maybe 130, Um, but I am all about consolidating and leveling up. And I think that's why I'm always running out of things to put in my case at shows, because I'm buying these cards that I know that I love them, or I know people are going to love them.
Mhm.
So when I look at a $5,000 card that my guy Dave at Extraordinary Cards has, when I look at a $5,000 card, I'm like, you know what? I don't have 5K in cash, handy right now, but I have 2K in cash. Let me see if I could throw together, or if he could pick out a package of cards that I have that he would take for the rest to make up the rest. So I think that's why I am always just kinda, like, running out of cards to put in my case when I set up at shows, because I'm just always leveling up. I'm always trying to funnel up. I'm always trying to move up into bigger and better cards, whereas I think your traditional dealer does both. Your traditional dealer, if it makes sense, they'll go up into the bigger card, but oftentimes, if it makes sense, they will trade down and they'll take 10 cards for their one big card because it just makes sense for them. And that's not something that I really ever do, because I always want the big card. I never want the smaller cards.
Yeah. Once I traded down on that you'll probably remember the Josh Allen hand auto,
In Long
you know,
Island?
Red Wave, yep, yep. No, actually, it was in New York City. It was at the
New York City.
show in
Okay, New York
New
City. Yeah,
York
yeah.
City. That was the only time I ever traded down. I've always traded up, and I'm okay throwing in cards that I know that I've sat on. So I'm, you know, my second year into this, I know football cards that I have and that after kickoffs, the kickoff season, prices are going down. And they'll sit in my case maybe for another month or two, but then I just put them out, take them out, and I'll put them in this case behind me, or I'll throw them in the closet because I know I'm just going to lose money on it. And now when I come into year 2 and I still have those same cards, I'm like, okay, if I've got a deal going that I don't mind throwing one of those 2 cards in to seal a deal, and that's kind of where I've just stepped up to, where I have, a box of cards that, that at some point I paid money and they had value to them and they still have value today, but they may not be cards people are, rushing out to buy. Right. But other dealers will see these cards saying, hey, I know that has value. And then if I can, say, look, I'll give you cash and these cards, can we come up with a deal? And I don't mind throwing those in and taking a little bit of an L on those cards. If I can get the deal done to get the bigger card, like you're saying, that is completely liquid. And learning from you and just learning from the hobby. I mean, the bigger cards that I have in my case now and that I want to have in my case are I just want them to all be liquid. I want them to be where I could say, I really want to move something. I really want to do something. I want to buy something. I can pull one of those cards out, and I could sell it tomorrow or sell it
So what's
today. And
your end game? Do you have an end game? Because you're saying like you only want cards in your case that you know are liquid. What
well,
is your end game? Like what is it that you're working toward?
so what I'm working towards is not only cards that are liquid in my case, but cards that are very low pop. Right? Not necessarily. There's a bunch of comps on number one, and number two, my biggest end game is not to have cards in my case that everybody else has in a room when I set up at a show. Because the worst thing is when somebody comes up and says, how much is this card? And they get your price, and there's 10 or 12 or 15 more of those same cards in that room. They're probably never going to come back and buy it from you. So if I can put cards in my case that are very low pop, and I know I'm the only guy in this room with that card. So if somebody wants to buy that card, this is where they're going to buy it. Right. So that's kind of my end game, being that kind of dealer where people are going to come to me and say, he always has great cards. They're low pop, they're high end. And, I know a couple dealers like that. And when I go to shows, I get excited to see them because I'm the guy buying some of those cards from them. And I understand what their philosophy is on their cases and their business. And that's kind of something I want to emulate.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great plan, and I guess really when it comes to either setting up at shows or really just having your collection, who doesn't want a ton of high end like great cards? And I'm not saying like high end Josh Allen and Justin Herberts. I'm saying like if what you collect is Star Trek cards, who doesn't want the Star Trek Superfractor one of one, auto? If you collect Mickey Mantle, who doesn't want a 52 tops Mickey Mantle? So I think I think 99% of the hobby that is, to their goal is to really kind of curate a collection that has value, has meaning, and something that you can look at and be proud of. But what I will say is um, that could be a slippery slope, though. When you are looking at certain guys' cases that just have these monster cards in there, and they're great, and they're high end, and they're liquid, like more than likely those guys were in the hobby for years, and they got card rich when the pandemic came. So these aren't guys that just got back into the hobby a few years ago. So I think in order for if that is your goal, then you have to play the long game, because you have to kind of ride out what the market's doing now. And even if the market stays the way it is now, which is still up compared to like 2018, but ride this out, continue to curate your inventory, your collection, continue to do all that. And then when the big boom comes, whether if it's 2 years from now or 10 years from now, you'll be ready with some good inventory, and you can do some of the things that these guys did a few years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I learned that, I shouldn't say we, I learned that, at last year's national, when you're talking about the 52 mantle and things like that. I mean, that was kind of the buzz at national because there was that one at auction, but how many other 52 mantles were around that room, during national last year, and they were selling for upwards of 50, $60,000. I mean, these people just didn't end up with these cards. They weren't buying these cars to flip these cars. These guys have been sitting on these cars for a while, right? And now was the time to move these cards. And yeah,
Well,
you're at
I'll tell you what it did seem like was at National, I definitely saw a bunch of 52 tops mantles floating around. Same thing with the Jordan Star card, the Star rookie, because that was also all the buzz because PSA had just started grading Star cards. And I think like what you're saying is part true, right? That a lot of these 52 mantles and 84 Jordan Star rookies were sitting in collections for years, and it seemed like they were both kind of getting their moment in the sun, like right around the same time. So they came out of collections, and then what I started seeing was like high end flippers just basically playing hot potato with them. It's like one high end flipper. It's like multiple flippers that we both know. We're like, oh hey, I just picked up this 52 tops mantle. I paid 38K cash for it because I had the cash in my PayPal. I paid 38K for it, and then the high end flipper right next to us is like, okay, let's make a deal for that. I'll give you 42 for it, part cash, part trade. And the guy's like, yeah, I'll take 42 for it. And then all of a sudden he hot potatoes it to him. And then now this guy is like, okay, now I got this 52 tops mantle. Let me see if I can get 45 for it, and then they just continue to kind of work their way up that way. That's at least the way I saw it. I think like the way that you described it is like a nice fairy tale way of being like, oh, they were in someone's collection, and then a little boy came up to the table with his father, and then they saw it and they pointed at it through the case, and they said, but the way I saw it was I just saw a lot of high-end dealers playing hot potato with these like big cards, and eventually they're definitely going to end up in someone's forever collection, right? It's going to be someone's forever card. And I'm not knocking flippers because flippers truly like lubricate the pipes of the hobby that get cards zinging across the world, across the country, through the mail, until it does end up winding up in a collector's hands. That's like, okay, this is going to be my forever card.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, I interviewed Brian Dwyer, right? REI, Robert Edward Auctions, and he was
Look at you
talking
name dropping.
he was
Look at
talking
you name
about
dropping.
he was talking about all these collections that they were just finding, right? Just finding that people were just calling in, somebody died, somebody willed them to them, things like that. And again, these things that weren't just bought. So I understand the hot potato game, but I think for the most part, and for a lot of those cards, that they all started coming out of the woodwork after the pandemic because people knew the prices were up on them, right?
Yeah.
And they knew there was some great value in those cards. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, man. Um, You know, I got to tell you something that I think I really want to pull the trigger on. I'm not sure though, but I know they're going to make my cards look much nicer, and I'm kind of getting veering off here. What are those cases called again that Luke sells?
Oh, slab mags.
Slab mags, and I love how they come in different colors. I love how and you can kind of color match them. Because I have like all my cards. I have all my cards like in these little black leather things. Like my favorite cards I have in these things.
Yeah.
But like I think I want to probably buy like ten slab mags. I
It,
feel
it,
like
love these
and
things.
I know you do. I know you have the slab mags, but
Yep.
I tell
Yep.
you, it's been on my mind so much. But the thing is, like when it comes to like my hobby money, my card money, I can't see myself spending like $200 on 10 slab mags.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like I'm like I would much rather buy a card. I would much rather
Yeah.
buy a card.
When I first bought them, and people bought the car that was in it, I let it go, and I've really gotten to a point now where when I sell the card, I open it up and they're like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm like, if you want it, it's $20 more, but I'm keeping the cases now, so I'm just recycling them, trying to recycle them into, newer pickups and new cards. Yeah. I mean,
Oh yeah.
it's not that they're expensive, but you're right. If you buy 10 of them, it's, $200. And I think, they had the inventory and then they have these new ones that are coming out that are at 25, right? So if you don't get the old inventory and you're in the new inventory, it's even $5 more, per. So the card has to be worth it to me. It just has to be a card that you really want to put in there and just, keep in as good shape as you possibly can.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, man. So yeah, we're already at the 30-minute mark. Let's talk for a minute, kind of segue out of what the topic is. Let's talk about this weekend. So, we have the Springfield show, right? We
Yeah.
have the Springfield show, but we also have the Hall of Fame Saturday night, and that's the big boy. That's the big thing that, I'm really looking forward to. So, about 6 months ago, I hosted a panel discussion with some collectors and dealers at the Hall of Fame on one of their stages, and it was a great time. It was unbelievable. After that, we did trade night on I think it's called Center Court at the Hall of Fame. And this Saturday, April 8th, we're doing the same thing, but we have much bigger names in the hobby that are going to be on the panel. So I'm hosting it. I'm emceeing it. You are going to be on the panel. So
Speaking of big names,
speaking of big names, Big Ken, capital K, capital E, capital N. We have who else? So we have Chris Costa from Card Vault. We have Mike Kantz, and he's from MC Sports Cards on eBay, which is one of the top sports cards eBay consignment shops. We have Hobby Shark, who's turned into like one of the biggest hobby watchdogs in the hobby now. We have John Newman from Sports Card Nation. We have Jonathan, who is basketball card guy. And who's the sixth guy? Who am I forgetting?
I thought that was everybody.
You're right. It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So 6 guys on the panel at the Hall of Fame. That's going to be from 6 to 7 p.m. And then immediately after the panel discussions over at 7 p.m., we're doing a trade night. So there's going to be a huge trade night at the NBA Hall of Fame. How freaking cool is that?
That's unbelievable. And I I talked about this the last time we talked about doing the trade night there. And, because we live so close to the Hall of Fame, right? It's like, yeah, it's right up the street. But for people who live, like I dream about going, to the NFL Hall of Fame, right? So it's not up the street from me. So, but if someone would be saying there was a trade night there, I'd be like, oh my God, that's unbelievable, right? So yeah, it's a big deal. It really is a big deal. And just what the perfect location, right? For not only for a panel, but a trade night at the Basketball Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Yeah. So this weekend, Saturday, April 8th, 2023, in Springfield at the Mass Mutual Center from 8 to 5, I believe, from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. 9,
to
but
5.
I think they're doing early bird, but let's just say 9. So from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. is the New England Card Show. It's like 200 tables, 200 vendors, dealers. You and I were always set up right in front. So we're going to be there front and center, talking to people, shaking hands, kissing babies, doing all that.
Selling cards, great deals.
Selling cards. Ken has some great deals. Me, I'm high on everything.
At least you admit
Oh,
it.
listen. I even said to you a couple months ago. I said, right, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I said, you know what? I'm like, it's not that I'm overdoing shows and setting up. It's just that I don't want to move any of my cards. Like I'm at the point now where I'm not enjoying selling cards anymore. What I enjoy most is sitting there and seeing people and talking and just like communicating with people and talking cards. All right, because it's more than talking sports. Like like we could talk sports all day, but it's when you really kind of narrow it down from talking sports to talking sports cards, that's what I love. I really, really love talking sports cards, and where better to do that than at a card show? And I do truly believe if you want to have your finger on the pulse of the hobby, you have to do it at shows, right? Like I can't do it from home watching content because the guy I'm watching on YouTube or listening to on a podcast, might not have any idea what he's talking about. He might just be going off what he heard from someone else. So I know that when the hobby numbers were down, right, like 6 months ago, 9 months ago, when the hobby felt like things were down and had really screeched to, like, I don't wanna say a halt, but had slowed down, we felt that at shows. We could tell a drastic difference
Mhm.
between shows 6 months before and shows then. We saw it night and day,
Yep.
so I think if you really wanna know what the mood of the hobby is, you have to go to shows. In my opinion, you have to go to National. You have to go to the Mint Collective. I didn't go to the Mint Collective, but, like, you gotta go to shows like that, and even if not, go to your local show. Go to a local show and check out the vibes. Walk the
Yeah.
room. Bring your cards. You don't even have to go there to spend money. Go there to transact. Go there to conversate.
Mm. Some of the cards I have in my case, I'm never going to sell them, but I love when people come up and want to talk about them. I mean, that's some of the best conversation you have when somebody comes up and like a Mike Tyson card and they want to talk about Mike, like a memory or, maybe another card or pull a card out of their case to say, wow, look at this. Right. And yeah, that's love setting up at shows, loving being behind the table and just talk to the people that come through. Um, you know, I like to sell things too, but if it was just about the conversation, I'd still be pretty happy.
Yeah, and, so I've learned so much from you over these last couple of years and your podcast. I mean, I feel like every podcast episode of yours, I feel like is truly a lesson and truly you really live by what the title of the episode is. Me, on the other hand, I feel like some episodes of Sports Card Therapist, I'm literally just kind of like rambling and they're not as thought out maybe as yours are. They're more like feeling based, and I'm not saying yours isn't, but I'm trying to give you a compliment here, and I'm, like, talking
I
about
I
mine.
I
So
absolutely appreciate the compliment, and I'm gonna give throw a compliment right back at you. So for me, being a teacher, right? The whole thing I feel has to have structure and all planning and setting it up and the bullet points and everything else. Where I mean, you get on, you're talking from the heart, right? But you're doing as much for the hobby as I am what you're talking about, right? Because we both see things differently and we both present differently, right? You see it differently and you're coming, even though you say I'm rambling, you're delivering a lesson too. Whether you know it or not, you're delivering a lesson too. People are learning from what you're saying and what you're talking about. Just our delivery is just different, right? Our setup is different, but at the end of the day, we're both with our content, we're both, just trying to teach people.
yeah, and yeah, and I appreciate that, man, and, like, so the point I was gonna make is when one of the biggest things that I've learned, like there's like really 5 main points that I feel like I always reference on my show about you and things I've learned from you and your podcast. And one of these things is this, right? Is and you put it so like eloquently. It was phenomenal. You talked about how when you're selling cards and you're selling a card and when you're set up, the goal usually typically is to sell a card and to transact and to do all those kind of things. But you had mentioned like selling a specific card and how you had really started to tell that story like 10 or 15 different times about how you acquired the card, what the card kind of meant to you, why it was that you wanted it. And you really had like the story down pat because it was a true story. You talked about why you got it and what it meant to you and this, that, and the third. And finally, when that card sold, it was kind of like bittersweet for you because you realized that you're never going to be able to tell that story again.
No.
That's the last time you're ever going to tell that story. And I just got chills as I said that, because I look at my collection, I look at my cards, and every single card in my collection, I feel like has one of these stories attached to it. And it's so crazy because like I'm looking at, my Zion case right now, and I probably have about 80 cards in there. And I'm serious. I probably have 80 different stories.
Yeah.
80 different stories that can
Yeah.
go with that, and all of them are from the heart, and all of them I remember every detail, I remember every emotion, every thought I had when I was making that purchase. So
And
yeah.
and the
Yeah.
crazy thing is, it doesn't matter the value of the card, because some of the best stories come with a card that could be worth 30, 40, or $50, right? You could be sitting on a $10,000 card, and it's got a good story, but sometimes some of these cards that, you never saw it coming, but they came with such a great story, and, yeah, you're right, you tell that story, and the day that card sells, the card and the story are gone, and you hope the person who bought it remembers the story and could say it to somebody else, be like, "Yeah, I bought it from this crackpot down here, but look, he had this whole story for this car." You never know. You never know where
Yeah.
where it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And so I'm looking at this card right now. It's literally right on top of my pile right here. So I'm just going to grab it, and if you don't mind, humor me for a moment with this story. So this is the and it's hard to kind of tell with the green screen. It almost like blocks out, but it's the 1972 Topps Dr. J rookie. So it's a Julius Irving rookie. Okay. And it's an on-card auto, and it's an auto grade of a 10, and he signed it, and the inscription is HOF 93, Hall of Fame 1993. And this card is extremely significant to me for a few reasons. This is the first Dr. J rookie I've ever owned. This is one of the most iconic sports cards of all time. It's more than likely in the top 10 most iconic basketball cards of all time. He's an absolute GOAT. And I could remember being at a show in New Jersey, and Tony from Cousins Collectibles actually came up from Philly to set up with us. Right. So he comes up from Philly to set up with us. And I had just by a matter of chance made a couple early big sales at the show. I mean, like guys were coming up. I sold my entire um my discount box, with all my stuff. So sold my discount box, and now I'm sitting on like a couple grand, right? I have a couple grand in my pocket that I didn't have an hour ago, and I'm like, okay, this is cool.
Burning a hole right through your pocket.
You know it, burning a hole right through it. So I start walking the rooms, right? So I say, you know what, man, this is burning a hole in my pocket, and I know that someone in this room, just like, and this is the reason why I talk about how important it is to go to shows, and if you have cash, like, participation is required. You need to go to shows, you need to walk up to dealers, you need to look at their case, you need to see who has what, who is high on their prices, who is about even on their prices, who is low on their prices, whatever the case. So I'm walking around, and there's a dealer there, and he's actually an actor. He's a Hollywood actor, but he also sets up at shows. And his name is Adam Mucci. And Adam, and that's Mucci. And he's known for like his roles in the Public Enemies movie with Johnny Depp. He was in one episode of The Sopranos. He was in a bunch of episodes of Boardwalk Empire. So in Public Enemies with Johnny Depp, that's the John Dillinger movie. He plays the cop that was beating up John Dillinger's girlfriend to try to get information out of her. So anyway, so I walk up to his table, and him and we've gotten to know each other a little bit because we see each other at the New Jersey shows always set up, and we've gotten to know each other. And he's like, yeah, I've seen your podcast. I'm like, I want to bring you on the podcast, and I just never have yet. Anyways, I've always loved the cards that he has because it's mostly vintage, but I end up asking him what he's asking for the price, or what he's asking for the Dr. J, and he's high on it. I mean, he's like almost double what comps are, which I'm fine with that. Like I get that doesn't mean I'm going to buy it, but I know he's probably high on it because he loves the card, So I say, listen, are you willing to come down? Because look, this is what the last one just sold for. And he goes, you know what? I can't get down that low, but I would move it for this. And it was $400 over the last comp. And I knew I had cash in my pocket. I stuck out my hand immediately. I said, deal. So that long-winded story, the reason why I say that is because for this one card, this is just one of 80. Okay. But I have a story as detailed, if not more detailed than that, for
Yeah.
every single card I own. And if I ever moved this card, and maybe I will move up to a better, higher grade version, or maybe I'll move up to a more rare grail card that I'm looking for. But I'm really don't want I would have a hole in my heart if I move this because of how much I've come to love this card and also the story that goes with it.
Yeah. And where it came from. Yeah. Where it came from. Yeah. Now you know how I feel with my cards. They're like my kids, right? They are.
Except
I
your kids hate you. Your cards don't hate you. No, listen, I think all parents can identify with that. All our kids hate us, right?
yeah.
I'm kidding,
Yeah.
by the way, and I know you go and visit your daughter often and you see the grandkids down in the
Yeah.
Carolinas and stuff. And do you do that once every 3 or 4 months or twice a year? How often do you do that?
Yeah, about every 3 months. I'll either
That's
go
awesome.
down or they'll come up, but
That's
yeah,
awesome.
and I'm just trying to get to the Carolina Courage game down there. I have 2 trips planned down there, and both times their Courage is out of town. So
Wow.
I'm gonna have to plan a 3rd trip just to go down and catch a game.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah,
that's cool, man. That's cool.
yeah.
Yeah, so let's wrap up this episode. Hopefully, I know we have a bunch of listeners all around the world, but I mean a bunch of local listeners, and I'm sure we're gonna be seeing some people at the show
Yep.
that have listened to this episode, right? Because there's going to be about 36 hours before the show. Um, that this drops before we're setting up. So listen, the code word, if you're listening to this episode, the code word to come up to us and let us know that you listen to this episode is Dr. J. That's the code word.
Dr.
All you
J.
got to say is Dr. J to us and we'll know, okay, they listen. They listen to the episode.
I love it. I love it. What a way to, yeah, get people to come and interact with us. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
awesome.
absolutely. So yeah, man, Ken, listen, keep up the incredible work. Keep up the great work that you're doing on your podcast. You're doing awesome things. Your content is must listen every single week. Every single week you are without a doubt the first show that I listen to. And I know for me, this episode's airing on both of our channels this week, which is pretty cool. And for me, this is episode 162.
This will be episode 78 for me.
Wow.
78. Man, who would have thought that I would have ever made it this far? And you're right, coming up with content, week after week. It's that's it's all being part of the hobby though. It's what I do and I love every weekend. You hear me, we talk. Every weekend I'm finding a show to go to.
Yeah.
Whether a little show, a big show, right here, go there, or I'm set up in a show and I just love getting out, talking to people. And a lot of what you do on your Sunday night, the PWCC vintage, not only are you spotlighting cards, but people are learning from you. Like I'm learning. I go on and I learn from you. And when I go out to the shows, the same thing. When I'm out at the shows, I, you know, I'm picking up knowledge all the time, even if it's not a direct conversation, right? Even if I'm just listening to another conversation happening at a table about a player or like, a couple memories these guys have had, I'm still listening and I'm learning about that. And the other thing I want to say, man, I appreciate all the compliments on the podcast. You were kind of my mentor, jumping into this, and you're always my first listen too. So I think we complement each other that way. Uh,
Well, I appreciate that, man. Yeah. And, Yeah, so sports card therapist, sports card lessons. Thank you very much for tuning in,
Yeah.
and hopefully we will see you
Dr.
guys.
J.
Dr. J, baby.
Dr.
Hopefully, we
J.
will see you guys at the Springfield show. The New England Card Show at the Mass Mutual Center will also be at the Hall of Fame, 6 p.m. sharp. If you want tickets to that panel discussion, you have to go to the show and come up to our table. We're going to be set up with John Newman from Sports Card Nation as well. So, big shout out to John. We're going to have tickets, free tickets for the panel discussion, but you have to go to the show in order to get tickets for the panel discussion. So just throwing that out there. Come up to us, get your tickets, and that's it.
We won't have them beforehand. We're only getting them at the show, so got to come to the show to get them, right?
Exactly. Yep. So I guess that's it, guys. So take care of yourselves and your collection.
Yeah. Take care of yourselves and everyone around you. Take care, Rob.
All right, you too, man.